The billionaire CEO pulled his baseball cap low and stepped into his own store. Nobody recognized Marcus Thompson, not the cashiers, not the security guard, not even the manager who was supposed to be running this place. He'd come here undercover for a reason. But nothing could have prepared him for what he heard next. Desperate sobbing echoing from the employee restroom. Through the crack under the door, a silver name badge lay abandoned on wet tile. Maria Santos, custodial staff. The crying inside wasn't just sadness. It was the sound of someone whose world was falling apart. Marcus's blood ran cold. 3 months ago, corporate had received glowing reports about this location. Perfect employee satisfaction scores. 0 complaints. But the woman crying behind that door told a different story entirely. As he stood frozen in the harsh fluorescent light, one terrifying question burned through his mind. If this was happening in his own company, under his own nose, what else had he missed? The truth he was about to uncover would be worse than anything he'd imagined, and it would force him to question everything he thought he knew about leadership, loyalty, and the real cost of looking the other way. What started as a routine visit was about to become the most important 48 hours of his career. Stay with me, because what happens next will change how you see workplace leadership forever. Marcus knocked gently on the restroom door. "Excuse me, are you okay in there?" The sobbing stopped abruptly. He heard shuffling, then the sound of someone trying to compose themselves. I'm fine. Just give me a minute." But her voice betrayed everything. This wasn't fine. This was a woman on the edge. When Maria Santos finally emerged, Marcus saw a petite Latina woman in her early 40s, her custodial uniform wrinkled and her eyes red from crying. She quickly bent to retrieve her name badge, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grasp it.
"I'm sorry,"
she whispered, not making eye contact.
"I shouldn't be. I need to get back to work."
Marcus studied her more closely. Maria's hands were cracked and raw from harsh cleaning chemicals. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, the kind that come from working multiple jobs and getting too little sleep. But it was something else that caught his attention. The way she flinched when footsteps approached from the main floor.
"You don't look fine,"
Marcus said softly. "I'm Mike, by the way. Just started here today." Maria glanced up, seeming to assess whether this stranger could be trusted. After a moment, her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. "It's just, everything's falling apart," she admitted. "My daughter Sophia needs surgery. Her heart condition is getting worse and I can't afford—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this." "How long have you worked here?" Marcus asked.
3 years.
Never missed a day, never been late. But lately, she gestured helplessly toward a bulletin board covered in work schedules. Marcus followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. The schedule was a mess of crossed-out shifts, reduced hours, and handwritten changes. Maria's name appeared sporadically, sometimes 20 hours one week, 35 the next, then dropped back to 15. No consistency, no way to budget or plan.
"They keep cutting my hours,"
Maria explained, her voice barely audible.
"Mr.
Miller says it's corporate policy, but I don't understand. The store's always busy. We're always understaffed." Marcus's jaw clenched. He knew the corporate policy on scheduling, and this wasn't it. Full-time employees were guaranteed consistent hours. What he was seeing looked like deliberate manipulation. "And when I asked about the health insurance that was supposed to kick in after 90 days, Maria's voice cracked. "He said I wasn't eligible because my hours were too irregular." The pieces were starting to form a picture that made Marcus's blood boil, but he forced himself to stay calm, to keep playing his role. "That doesn't sound right," he said carefully. Maria looked around nervously, then leaned closer.
"There are others too.
Tommy in electronics, Sarah in cosmetics. We're all having the same problems. But Mr. Miller says if we don't like it, plenty of people would be happy to take our jobs." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. Brad Miller, he remembered the name from the management roster. Regional manager, good performance reviews, no red flags in his file. At least none that had made it to corporate.
"Listen, Mike,"
Maria continued, her voice dropping to a whisper.
I need this job. My daughter, she's only 8, and without the surgery.
She couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus watched as she pinned her name badge back onto her uniform with trembling fingers. That small silver rectangle represented everything to her. Her daughter's medical care, their rent, their survival. And someone was using that desperation against her. I should go, Maria said, glancing toward the main floor. My shift ends at 11, but I'm supposed to come back at 6 tomorrow morning for inventory. Mr. Miller scheduled me for a double shift, but somehow the system only shows 8 hours of pay. As she walked away, Marcus noticed her slight limp, probably from standing on concrete floors for years without proper support. The company handbook clearly stated that employees were entitled to anti-fatigue mats and ergonomic support, another policy that apparently wasn't being followed. Marcus stood alone in the hallway, staring at that chaotic schedule board. Each crossed-out shift represented a family struggling to make ends meet. Each arbitrary hour cut meant someone choosing between groceries and gas money. He'd built Thompson Enterprises on the principle that good companies take care of their people. But somewhere in the gap between boardroom policies and floor-level reality, that principle was being systematically destroyed. The question was, how deep did this go, and who else was suffering while he sat in his ivory tower, oblivious to their pain? Marcus didn't have to wait long to see the system in action. The next morning, he watched from the break room as Maria clocked in for her 6 a.m. shift. She moved carefully, favoring her left leg, but her face was determined. Whatever struggles she faced at home, she was here, ready to work. At 6:47 a.m., Brad Miller emerged from his office. Brad was exactly what Marcus had expected. Mid-30s, overly gelled hair, and the kind of swagger that came from having just enough power to abuse it. He wore his manager badge like a weapon, and his eyes immediately found Maria mopping near the electronics section. "Santos!" Brad's voice cut across the store like a whip crack. Maria's shoulders tensed, but she continued working. "Santos, I'm talking to you!" She finally looked up, her face carefully neutral. "Yes, Mr. Miller? This floor is still dirty. What exactly have you been doing for the past hour?" Marcus watched Maria's jaw tighten. The floor was spotless. He could see his reflection in the tiles, but she simply nodded. "I'll go over it again." "You better. And next time, maybe try actually working instead of feeling sorry for yourself." Brad's voice dripped with contempt. "Speaking of which, I need to see you in my office. Now." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists. He forced himself to stay seated, to keep observing. If he intervened now, he'd blow his cover before understanding the full scope of the problem. In Brad's office, Maria stood while Brad remained seated, a deliberate power play that made Marcus's skin crawl. Through the glass partition, he could see Maria's posture grow smaller with each word Brad spoke. Tommy Chen, the electronics clerk Maria had mentioned, slipped into the break room and sat down heavily beside Marcus. "Poor Maria," Tommy muttered, shaking his head. "Third time this week she's been called in there." "What's he saying to her?" Marcus asked. Tommy glanced around nervously. "Same thing he says to all of us, that we're lucky to have jobs, that people like us—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "That we should be grateful for whatever hours we get." "People like us?" "You know, immigrants, single mothers, people who can't afford to quit." Tommy's voice was bitter. "Brad knows exactly who he can push around." Through the glass, Marcus watched Brad lean back in his chair, his body language radiating casual cruelty. Maria stood rigid, her hands clasped behind her back like a soldier enduring inspection. Then Brad did something that made Marcus's vision go red. He pulled out Maria's timesheet and began making changes with a red pen, right in front of her. Marcus couldn't hear the words, but he could see Maria's face crumple as Brad slashed through her recorded hours. "He's cutting her time again," Tommy whispered, "probably claiming she took unauthorized breaks or something. Last week, he docked Sarah 3 hours for excessive bathroom usage. She's pregnant." Marcus reached for his phone, his fingers finding the voice recorder app. Whatever was happening in that office, he needed evidence. Through the thin walls, Brad's voice carried clearly. "Told you before, Santos, if you can't handle the workload without getting emotional, maybe this isn't the right job for you. There are plenty of people who'd be grateful for your position."
Please, Mr. Miller. Maria's voice was barely audible. I just need consistent hours.
My daughter, your personal problems aren't my concern. What concerns me is that you've been talking to other employees about scheduling. That sounds like troublemaking to me. Marcus's thumb hit record. I wasn't making trouble, I was just what? Trying to organize some kind of complaint? Because that would be very unfortunate for your employment status here. The threat was crystal clear. Maria fell silent. Now I'm cutting you back to 12 hours next week. Maybe that'll help you focus on work instead of stirring up drama. And Santos? If I hear you've been talking to anyone else about scheduling or policies, we'll need to discuss whether you're a good fit for this company at all. Marcus watched Maria nod silently, her dignity stripped away piece by piece. When she finally emerged from the office, her face was pale but composed. She walked past the break room without looking in, her head held high despite everything. But Marcus had seen enough. The phone in his pocket contained Brad's own words, a smoking gun that revealed the systematic abuse of power happening under Thompson Enterprises' name. As Brad returned to his office, whistling casually like he hadn't just destroyed someone's week, Marcus felt something crystallize inside him. This wasn't just about Maria anymore. This was about every vulnerable employee who'd been ground down by petty tyrants like Brad Miller. The time for observation was over. Now it was time to see just how deep this corruption went. Marcus left the store that evening with his mind racing. He drove his rental car, a modest sedan, nothing that would draw attention, back to the budget hotel where he'd been staying under his fake identity. In room 237, surrounded by corporate reports and employee files, he began planning his next move. The recording on his phone played back Brad's threats, each word like a nail in the man's professional coffin. But Marcus knew this was just the tip of the iceberg. If Brad felt comfortable enough to openly threaten employees, what was he doing when he thought nobody was watching? Marcus pulled up the store's employment records on his laptop. What he found made his stomach turn. Over the past 8 months, the store had seen a 60% turnover rate among hourly employees. The official reason listed for most departures was voluntary resignation, but Marcus could read between the lines. People didn't voluntarily leave jobs in an economy like this. They were driven out. He cross-referenced the departure dates with Brad's performance reviews. Ironically, Brad's numbers looked stellar. Labor costs down 23%, efficiency ratings up, 0 formal complaints filed with HR. On paper, Brad Miller was a model manager. But Marcus was beginning to understand how Brad had gamed the system. Keep employees desperate and scared, prevent them from working enough hours to qualify for benefits, and make sure anyone who might complain simply disappeared from the roster. It was elegant in its cruelty. Marcus opened a new browser window and began crafting his deeper cover story. Mike Henderson, laid-off construction worker, desperate for any job, no family to worry about, just grateful for the opportunity. The kind of employee Brad would see as perfectly exploitable. He practiced the persona in the mirror, adjusting his posture, his speech patterns, even his walk. Marcus had grown up in neighborhoods like this before his business took off. He knew how to blend in. The key was remembering, rather than acting. The next morning, Marcus returned to the store in his worn jeans and second-hand work boots. He approached Brad's office with the perfect mixture of desperation and eagerness. "Excuse me, Mr. Miller? I heard you might have some openings. I'm willing to work any shift, any hours you need." Brad looked up from his computer, his eyes immediately assessing this new potential victim. Marcus could practically see the calculations running through the man's head. Another desperate worker to manipulate. Experience? Construction mostly, but that dried up. I need steady work. I'm not picky about the job. Cleaning, stocking, whatever you got. References? Marcus handed over a carefully crafted resume, complete with fake references he'd arranged through contacts. These guys will vouch for me. I show up, I work hard, I don't cause problems. Brad's smile was predatory. I like that attitude. Tell you what, Mike, I can start you in custodial. Night shift, $12 an hour. You'll be working with Maria, but don't let her fill your head with complaints. She's got a tendency toward drama. The casual cruelty in Brad's voice made Marcus want to reach across the desk, but he forced himself to nod eagerly. That sounds perfect, sir. When do I start? Tonight, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And Mike? Brad leaned forward. I reward loyalty and hard work. Employees who understand how things work here do well. Employees who cause trouble don't. Marcus nodded like he understood perfectly. And he did, just not in the way Brad intended. That evening, Marcus changed into his work clothes in the store bathroom, transforming himself completely into Mike Henderson. He pinned his temporary name tag to his shirt, the plastic rectangle feeling foreign after years of expensive suits and boardroom meetings. When Maria arrived for the night shift, she looked surprised to see him. You came back, she said quietly. Told you I needed the job, Marcus replied. Guess we're working together. Maria studied his face, perhaps sensing something different about this new employee but unable to place what it was. Stick close to me tonight, she said finally. I'll show you the ropes. And Mike, everything I told you yesterday about being careful around Mr. Miller? Double that for the night shift. That's when he does his worst work. As the store lights dimmed and the last customers filtered out, Marcus felt the weight of what he was about to discover. Somewhere in the next 8 hours, he would learn the full extent of Brad Miller's operation. He was no longer just observing the problem. He was about to live it. The store transformed after closing time. What had seemed like a normal retail environment during the day revealed its true nature in the fluorescent-lit shadows of the night shift. Marcus followed Maria through her routine, learning the intricate choreography of overnight custodial work. But within the first hour, he began noticing things that made his blood pressure rise. Maria, why are you cleaning the employee break room with the same supplies you use for the bathrooms? He asked, watching her rinse a mop in a bucket that reeked of industrial disinfectant. She glanced around nervously before answering. Mr. Miller cut the cleaning supply budget, says we're using too much. She held up a nearly empty bottle of floor cleaner. This has to last the whole week for the entire store. Marcus knew the corporate allocation for cleaning supplies. This store should have 10 times what he was seeing. At 11:30 p.m., Brad made his first appearance. He prowled through the aisles like a predator, his footsteps echoing in the empty store. When he found Maria restocking paper towels in the customer restrooms, his voice cut through the silence. Santos, you're moving too slow. At this rate, you'll be here until morning. I'm working as fast as I can, Mr. Miller. Not fast enough. I'm docking 30 minutes from your timesheet for inefficiency. Marcus watched from behind a display rack as Brad pulled out his phone and made a note. 30 minutes. $6 stolen right in front of his eyes. But it got worse. At 1:15 a.m., Brad returned with a clipboard. Santos, Henderson, come here. They gathered in the main aisle as Brad consulted his notes. Corporate's been asking questions about our labor costs. Starting next week, we're implementing some efficiency measures. He smiled like he was announcing bonuses. Instead of 2 people on night custodial, we're going back to 1. Maria's face went pale. Mr. Miller, this is a 45,000 square foot store. One person can't. One person can and will. Maria, since you've been here longer, you keep the position. But you'll need to handle the full workload in the same time frame. Marcus did the math in his head. What they were doing tonight with 2 people was already pushing the limits of human endurance. Asking one person to do it all was physically impossible. If you can't handle it, Brad continued, I can always find someone who can. After Brad left, Maria slumped against a checkout counter. I can't do this whole store alone, she whispered. But if I complain, you'll lose the job entirely, Marcus finished. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. My daughter's surgery is scheduled for next month. I need this insurance. That's when Marcus noticed something that made his investigative instincts flare. Brad had left his office door slightly open, and through the gap, Marcus could see him at his computer typing rapidly. Maria, Can you handle the East Wing by yourself for a few minutes? I want to check something. She looked confused, but nodded.
Be careful, Mike. If he catches you snooping.
Marcus moved silently toward the office. Through the crack in the door, he could see Brad's computer screen clearly. What he saw made his hands shake with rage. Brad was logged into the employee scheduling system, systematically reducing hours for multiple employees. But he wasn't just cutting time. He was redistributing those hours to a phantom employee named B. Miller Jr. Brad was stealing hours from his workers and assigning them to a fake account, probably his own son or a way to pad his own overtime. Every hour he stole from Maria, from Tommy, from Sarah, was going directly into his pocket. Marcus pulled out his phone and began recording through the door crack. The evidence was right there on the screen. Systematic wage theft happening in real time. But then he saw something even worse. Brad opened another program, the health insurance enrollment system. He pulled up Maria's file and changed her employment status from full-time eligible to part-time temporary, despite her working full-time hours for 3 years. With a few keystrokes, Brad had just denied Maria the health coverage her daughter needed for surgery. Marcus felt a rage so pure it took all his self-control not to burst through that door. But he forced himself to keep recording, to document every click, every theft, every casual destruction of a family's future. At 3 a.m., Brad emerged from his office looking satisfied. Henderson, I need you to move all the pallets from the back room to the sales floor, by yourself. Marcus looked at the mountain of boxes, easily a 4-person job. All of them? Problem with that? Because I can call someone who won't give me attitude. No problem, Marcus said through gritted teeth. As he began the back-breaking work, moving hundreds of pounds of merchandise alone, Marcus understood something crucial. This wasn't just about money for Brad. It was about power. The joy of watching people struggle, of holding their lives in his hands and squeezing just to see them suffer. By 4 a.m., Marcus's back was screaming and his hands were raw. But he'd gathered enough evidence to destroy Brad Miller's career 10 times over. Wage theft, benefit fraud, unsafe working conditions, workplace harassment. It was a masterclass in how to abuse every labor law on the books. But as dawn approached and he watched Maria limp through her final tasks, barely able to stand after 10 hours of brutal work, Marcus realized something that changed everything. This wasn't just about Brad Miller anymore. This was about a system that allowed predators like Brad to thrive while good people like Maria suffered in silence. And that system started at the top, with him. Tomorrow, it would all come to an end. But first, he needed one more piece of evidence, the smoking gun that would make his case unshakable. Marcus's opportunity came at 5:30 a.m., just as the night shift was winding down. Brad had disappeared into his office for what he called his end-of-shift paperwork, leaving Marcus and Maria to finish the final cleaning tasks. But Marcus had noticed a pattern over the past few hours. Every 30 minutes, Brad's office phone would ring with the same distinctive ringtone, 2 short bursts, followed by a longer one. Each time, Brad would answer in hushed tones, speaking for exactly 3 to 4 minutes before hanging up. As Maria gathered the cleaning supplies, Marcus made his decision. I'm going to empty the trash in the office area, he told her. Maria looked concerned. Mr. Miller doesn't like anyone near his office when he's doing paperwork. I'll be quick. Marcus grabbed a trash bin and pushed his cart toward the administrative area. The office hallway was dimly lit, with Brad's office at the far end. Through the frosted glass, he could see Brad's silhouette hunched over his desk. Then the phone rang. 2 short bursts, 1 long. Marcus positioned himself near the supply closet adjacent to Brad's office, close enough to hear but hidden from view. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Miller here, Brad answered, his voice low but audible through the thin walls. Yeah, I got your numbers for this week. Santos is down to 12 hours, Chen's at 15, the pregnant one, Sarah. I'm putting her on inventory duty, that'll make her quit within a month. Marcus's blood ran cold. Brad was reporting to someone about his systematic harassment of employees. No complaints filed. They're too scared to go to corporate. I've made sure of that. Brad chuckled. The beauty is, corporate sees our labor costs dropping and thinks I'm some kind of efficiency genius. The voice on the other end was muffled, but Marcus could make out a question about documentation. Of course I'm covering my tracks. I've got fake performance reviews for all of them. Attitude problems, reliability issues. You know the drill. If anyone ever asks, I've got a paper trail showing they deserved what they got. Marcus heard papers rustling as Brad pulled out files. Here's the beautiful part. I'm billing all their cut hours to my nephew's employee ID. Kid's making $800 a week and he's never set foot in the store. Corporate pays the wages to an account I control, and I just pocket the difference. The conversation continued for another minute, with Brad detailing how he'd been running this scheme across multiple stores, not just this one. Every word was being captured on Marcus's phone, a complete confession to federal wage theft, conspiracy, and fraud. But then Brad said something that made Marcus's hands tremble with rage. The Santos woman is the perfect target. Single mother, needs the insurance, doesn't speak up. I could cut her to 0 hours and she'd still show up begging for work. Her kid needs some kind of heart surgery, so she'll take whatever abuse I dish out. The casual cruelty in Brad's voice, the way he spoke about Maria's desperation as a tool for his entertainment, pushed Marcus past his breaking point. Yeah, I know the type, Brad continued. These people are grateful for scraps. They think they're lucky to have any job at all. Makes them real easy to control. Marcus heard Brad's chair creak as he leaned back. Don't worry about exposure. Who's gonna believe them? A bunch of immigrants and high school dropouts against a regional manager with stellar performance reviews? Corporate would laugh them out of the building. The call ended with Brad scheduling another check-in for the following week. As Marcus heard the phone click into its cradle, he realized he'd just recorded a complete confession, not just to the crimes Brad was committing, but to his entire philosophy of exploitation. Marcus quickly backed away from the office, his heart pounding. He had everything he needed. The recorded calls, the computer screen footage of Brad manipulating timesheets, photographic evidence of unsafe working conditions, and now this. Brad's own words proving premeditated, systematic abuse of vulnerable employees. As he rejoined Maria for the final cleaning tasks, Marcus noticed she was moving even more slowly than usual. Her face was pale, and she kept pressing her hand to her chest. Maria, are you okay? Just tired, she said, but Marcus could see it was more than that. The stress, the physical demands, the constant fear, it was literally killing her. When was the last time you saw a doctor? Maria laughed bitterly. Doctors cost money. My insurance doesn't kick in until I work full-time for 90 days straight, but Mr. Miller makes sure that never happens. Marcus watched her struggle to lift a bag of trash that weighed less than 30 pounds. This woman was working herself to death for a man who saw her suffering as entertainment. At 6 a.m. sharp, Brad emerged from his office with a stack of paperwork and a satisfied smile. Good work tonight, people. Santos, make sure you're here at 2 p.m. for inventory. Henderson, I might have some more shifts for you if you keep this up. As Brad walked away, whistling tunelessly, Marcus felt the weight of the evidence on his phone. Tomorrow morning, he would end Brad Miller's reign of terror. But tonight, he had to watch Maria hobble to her car, knowing she'd be back in 8 hours to face it all again. The smoking gun was loaded. Now it was time to fire. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He spent the early morning hours in his hotel room, organizing evidence and making phone calls. By 8 a.m., he had assembled a comprehensive file of Brad Miller's crimes, complete with recorded confessions, photographic evidence, and financial documentation. But he wasn't just preparing a case. He was preparing for war. At 1:45 p.m., Marcus returned to the store as Mike Henderson one last time. He found Maria in the break room, trying to force down a peanut butter sandwich despite obvious nausea. You sure you're okay? He asked, genuinely concerned. Just need to get through today, she whispered. Sophia's surgery got moved up to next week. I can't afford to miss any more hours. Marcus felt his resolve crystallize. This ended today. At 2 p.m. sharp, Brad gathered the afternoon shift for mandatory inventory training. About 15 employees stood in a semicircle near customer service, including Maria, Tommy, Sarah, who was now visibly pregnant, and several others Marcus recognized as victims of Brad's systematic abuse. "All right, people, listen up," Brad announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who enjoyed wielding power over others. "Corporate's breathing down our necks about inventory accuracy, so we're implementing some new procedures." He pulled out a clipboard thick with forms. "From now on, any discrepancies come out of the responsible employee's paycheck. Lost merchandise, miscounts, damaged goods, it all gets deducted from your wages." Marcus saw several employees exchange worried glances. This was illegal under federal labor law, and Brad knew it. "I know some of you might think this is unfair," Brad continued, his eyes finding Maria in the crowd. "But maybe if certain people paid more attention to their work instead of worrying about personal problems, we wouldn't need these measures." The direct attack on Maria was the final straw. Marcus stepped forward from the back of the group. "Actually, Brad, I think there's something unfair here, but it's not what you think." Brad's eyes narrowed. "Henderson, you got something to say?" "Yeah, I do." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I've got quite a lot to say, actually." The first recording began to play. Brad's voice, crystal clear, boasting about cutting employees' hours and pocketing the difference. The effect was electric. Every employee in the circle turned to stare at Brad, whose face had gone from smug confidence to pale shock in seconds. "What the hell is this?" Brad sputtered. "This is you, last night at 5:30 a.m., explaining to your accomplice how you've been stealing wages and manipulating schedules." Marcus's voice was calm, controlled, but every word hit like a hammer blow. The recording continued. "The Santos woman is the perfect target. Single mother, needs the insurance, doesn't speak up." Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Around the circle, other employees began to murmur, anger building in their voices. "You recorded me illegally!" Brad shouted, but his bluster couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. "Actually, Michigan is a one-party consent state. Perfectly legal." Marcus stepped closer to Brad, and for the first time, let his real authority show through. "But wage theft? Benefit fraud? Conspiracy to defraud? Those are federal crimes." Brad's eyes darted around the circle of employees, all of whom were now looking at him with undisguised hatred. "You don't know who you're messing with, Henderson. I'll have you arrested for what? Exposing the truth?" Marcus reached into his other pocket and pulled out something that made Brad's blood drain from his face entirely. A gold badge. CEO, Thompson Enterprises. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant sound of shopping carts, the sharp intake of breath from 15 employees who suddenly understood what they were witnessing. "My name isn't Mike Henderson," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the store. "I'm Marcus Thompson. I own this company, and you, Brad Miller, are finished." The explosion of reactions was immediate. Gasps, whispers, a few employees stepping back in shock. But Marcus kept his eyes locked on Brad, whose face had cycled through shock, fear, and was now settling into desperate anger. "You can't do this!" Brad screamed. "I've got rights! I've got a contract!" "You had a contract," Marcus corrected. "But fraud voids all employment agreements. Security." Two Thompson Enterprise security officers, who had been positioned outside since 9 a.m., entered the store and approached Brad. "Brad Miller, you're terminated effective immediately. You're also under investigation for wage theft, benefit fraud, and conspiracy. These officers will escort you from the premises." As security moved toward Brad, he made one last desperate play. "You can't prove anything. It's their word against mine." He pointed at the employees. "Who's gonna believe a bunch of—" "Careful!" Marcus's voice cut like ice. "I've got your own recorded confession. I've got computer logs showing every illegal transaction. I've got photographic evidence of every violation." He stepped closer to Brad, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "And I've got something else, Brad. I've got power. Real power. The kind you've been pretending to have." Brad's shoulders sagged as the security officers reached him. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Yes, it is." Marcus turned to address the gathered employees. And for all of you, it's just beginning. As Brad was escorted from the store, past customers who stopped to stare, past checkout lanes he'd terrorized employees in, past the office where he'd orchestrated months of systematic abuse, Marcus felt a satisfaction deeper than any business deal he'd ever closed. But the real work was just starting. The silence after Brad's departure was deafening. 15 employees stood in a circle, staring at their actual CEO, trying to process what had just happened. Marcus could see confusion, relief, and wariness battling across their faces. Maria was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper.
You're really the owner?
I am, and I owe all of you an apology. Marcus looked each employee in the eye. I built this company on the principle that we take care of our people, but I failed you. I got so focused on boardroom numbers that I lost sight of what was happening on the ground. Tommy stepped forward, still clutching his inventory clipboard. So, what happens now? Are we all getting fired for talking to you? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. These people were so conditioned to fear retaliation that even their liberation looked like a threat. Nobody's getting fired. In fact, we're going to fix everything Brad broke, starting right now. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm calling our head of HR. Every illegal hour cut, every stolen wage, every denied benefit. We're going to make it right. Within 20 minutes, Rebecca Chen, Thompson Enterprises' Chief Human Resources Officer, arrived with a team of 3 specialists and a stack of laptops. Marcus had worked with Rebecca for 8 years, and she was one of the few executives he trusted completely. Rebecca, I need you to conduct emergency audits on every employee file Brad Miller has touched in the past year. Full wage restoration, immediate benefit enrollment for anyone who's been illegally denied coverage. Rebecca's team spread out across the break room, setting up a temporary processing center. Maria Santos, Rebecca called out, consulting her tablet. You've been here 3 years, correct? Maria nodded nervously, still not quite believing this was real. According to Brad's records, you're classified as part-time temporary with no benefits. But your actual hours worked show you've been full-time for 34 months straight. Rebecca's fingers flew across her tablet. As of right now, you're classified as full-time permanent with complete health coverage, retroactive to your original hire date. Maria's knees buckled. Marcus caught her arm as tears streamed down her face.
My daughter's surgery,
she whispered.
fully covered. Pre-authorization will be processed today.
Rebecca's voice was warm but efficient.
And Maria, you're owed $14,847 in stolen wages and unpaid overtime. That check will be cut within 48 hours.
The sound that escaped Maria's throat was part sob, part laugh, part prayer. Around the room, other employees were having similar conversations as Rebecca's team worked through the files. But Marcus wasn't finished. Everyone, I need you to listen carefully. He stood in the center of the room, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built a billion-dollar company from nothing. What happened here can never happen again. So we're changing how this company operates. He gestured to Sarah, the pregnant cashier who'd been hiding her condition in fear. Sarah, how far along are you?
7 months,
she said quietly. Effective immediately. You're on paid administrative leave until after your maternity leave ends. Full salary, full benefits, and a guaranteed position when you're ready to return. Sarah's hand went to her belly, her eyes wide with disbelief. Marcus continued. Tommy, you mentioned wanting to move into management. How would you feel about assistant store manager? Tommy's clipboard clattered to the floor. Sir, I don't have a college degree or... You have something better. You know what it's like to work every position in this store, and you care about the people who work here. That's what I need in management. But the biggest change was yet to come. Maria, Marcus said, turning to face the woman who'd unknowingly triggered this entire transformation. I have an offer for you. She looked up at him with eyes still red from crying, still struggling to believe her daughter would get the surgery she needed. I'm offering you the store manager position. The silence was absolute. Even Rebecca's team stopped typing. Sir, Maria stammered, I'm just... I clean floors. I don't know how to... You know how to work harder than anyone should have to. You know how to care about people even when you're being mistreated. You know every inch of this store and every challenge these employees face. Marcus's voice grew stronger. Maria, you've been managing your own impossible situation for 3 years. Managing a store will be easy by comparison. But I don't have experience. I'll provide training, full management development program, business courses, whatever you need. Starting salary is $65,000 plus benefits, with performance bonuses tied to employee satisfaction, not just profit margins. Maria stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. $65,000? That's just the starting point. Good managers who take care of their people get promoted to regional positions. Those pay 6 figures. Around the room, Marcus could see the transformation beginning. 15 people who'd walked in expecting another day of abuse were watching their lives change in real time. But the most important change was still to come. One more thing, Marcus announced. We're implementing an employee council at every Thompson Enterprise location. Representatives elected by workers with direct access to corporate leadership. No retaliation, no intimidation, no fear. If something like this ever starts happening again, you'll have a direct line to stop it. He pulled out a business card and handed it to Maria. This has my personal cell phone number on it. If anyone, manager, regional director, even another CEO, ever treats you or your team the way Brad did, you call me immediately. Tommy raised his hand tentatively. What about Brad? Does he just get away with this? Marcus's expression hardened. Brad's case has been forwarded to federal investigators. Wage theft is a felony. He'll face criminal charges, and we'll be pursuing civil litigation to recover every penny he stole, not just from us, but from you. Rebecca looked up from her laptop. Speaking of which, Marcus, we've identified similar patterns at 4 other stores. Same MO, different managers. Same response. Full investigations, complete restitution, and anyone involved gets prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Marcus's voice carried the weight of absolute commitment. We're not just fixing this store. We're fixing the entire company. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus watched 15 demoralized employees transform into something he'd never seen before, a real team. People who'd been isolated by fear were now talking to each other, sharing stories, discovering they weren't alone. Maria stood in the center of it all, still wearing her custodial uniform, but now carrying herself differently. The woman who'd been crying in a bathroom that morning was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand her own worth. Thank you, she said to Marcus, her voice steady for the first time since he'd met her. Not just for the job or the money, for seeing us as people. Marcus felt a tightness in his chest. Thank you for reminding me what leadership actually means. As the sun set over Detroit, Thompson's department store looked the same from the outside. But inside, everything had changed, and tomorrow, the real work would begin. 3 weeks later, Marcus returned to the store for what he'd privately started calling his reality check visits. But the scene that greeted him was almost unrecognizable from the place he'd infiltrated just a month before. The first thing he noticed was the sound, laughter coming from the employee break room. Real laughter, not the nervous kind people make when they're afraid their boss might be listening. In the break room, he found Tommy training 2 new hires on the inventory system, his natural leadership abilities finally given room to flourish. On the wall behind him hung a framed certificate, Assistant Manager of the Month, Employee Choice Award. The key is accuracy, not speed, Tommy was explaining to the trainees. We'd rather you take your time and get it right than rush and make mistakes. Nobody's going to yell at you for being thorough. Marcus smiled at the indirect reference to the old regime. Under Brad, employees had been terrorized into rushing through tasks, leading to errors that became excuses for further punishment. Near the customer service desk, Sarah was helping a customer process a return. At 8 months pregnant, she was glowing with the confidence of someone who knew her job was secure, regardless of her condition. The maternity leave policy Marcus had implemented store-wide had already been adopted by 3 major competitors, a ripple effect he hadn't anticipated, but deeply appreciated. But it was Maria who represented the most dramatic transformation. Marcus found her in the store office, bent over a laptop with the focused intensity of someone mastering new skills. She'd traded her custodial uniform for business casual attire, and her nameplate now read, Maria Santos, store manager. But more importantly, she carried herself with an authority that came from genuine competence, not fear. "How are the management courses going?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Challenging," Maria admitted, saving her work and looking up with a smile. "I never thought I'd be learning about profit margins and employee development strategies, but it's amazing what makes sense when you've actually worked every job in the building." She gestured to a chart on her wall showing employee satisfaction scores. The numbers had skyrocketed from Brad's abysmal ratings to industry-leading levels in just 3 weeks. "The team is incredible," Maria continued. "Once people stopped being afraid, they started bringing me ideas. Tommy suggested cross-training everyone so nobody feels trapped in one department. Sarah designed a new customer feedback system. Even the part-time high school kids are contributing innovations." Marcus looked through the office window at the sales floor, where he could see the tangible results of Maria's leadership. Employees moved with purpose rather than fear. Customers were actually smiling as they interacted with staff who seemed genuinely happy to help. "How's Sophia doing?" Marcus asked. Maria's entire face lit up. "She had her surgery last week. The doctors say the repair was perfect. She'll be able to run and play like any other kid." Her voice caught slightly. "She wants to meet you. She calls you the man who saved Mommy's job." "I'd like that very much." "There's something else," Maria said, pulling out a folder. "Remember how you asked me to document any other situations like what happened with Brad?" Marcus leaned forward, his attention sharpening. "I've been talking to managers at other retail chains. Not officially, just conversations at industry meetups." "Marcus, what Brad was doing, it's not uncommon. The wage theft, the benefit manipulation, the psychological abuse, it's almost like there's a playbook being passed around." She opened the folder to reveal a compilation of stories from workers across the retail sector. "I think Thompson Enterprise could lead an industry-wide change, not just fixing our own problems, but setting a standard that forces everyone else to follow." Marcus felt that familiar electricity of a big idea taking shape. "What are you thinking?" "A certification program. Worker-verified fair employment or something like that. Stores that meet the standards get the certification. Customers can choose to shop at places that treat employees fairly. And the verification comes from the workers themselves, not corporate self-reporting." "Exactly. Anonymous surveys, surprise audits, real accountability." Maria's eyes were bright with passion. "We've got the credibility now. Everyone knows Thompson Enterprise was willing to investigate and fix its own problems publicly. Other companies would have to follow suit or look terrible by comparison." Marcus sat back, impressed by the strategic thinking. 6 months ago, Maria had been afraid to ask for consistent hours. Now she was designing industry-wide reform initiatives. "Draft a proposal," he said. "Full business plan, implementation strategy, budget requirements. I want to see it within 2 weeks." Maria nodded, already making notes. As Marcus prepared to leave, he took one more walk through the store. Near the electronics section, he spotted the bulletin board where Brad's chaotic scheduling had once terrorized employees. Now it displayed a clean, predictable schedule where every employee knew their hours weeks in advance, alongside photos from the store's first-ever employee appreciation picnic. At the customer service desk, a familiar sight caught his eye. The same silver name badge that had fallen to the bathroom floor a month ago. But now it read, Maria Santos, store manager, and it was pinned to a blazer instead of a custodial uniform. As he headed for the exit, Tommy called out from behind the electronics counter. "Mr. Thompson, before you go, we wanted to give you something." Tommy produced a framed photo. The entire store team gathered around the new employee break room, which had been renovated with comfortable seating, a proper kitchenette, and large windows that let in natural light. In the center of the group, Maria held a small plaque that read, Thompson's Department Store, Employee Choice Best Place to Work 2024. "It's not an official award," Tommy explained with a grin. "We made it ourselves, but we figured if anyone should decide whether a place is good to work, it should be the people who actually work there." Marcus accepted the photo, feeling an unexpected tightness in his throat. In all his years of business success, no recognition had meant more. "Thank you," he said simply. "All of you." As he walked to his car, Marcus reflected on how profoundly the last month had changed not just this store, but his entire understanding of leadership. He'd started this journey thinking he was rescuing his employees from a bad manager. Instead, they'd rescued him from becoming the kind of leader who loses sight of why businesses exist in the first place, to serve people, not just profits. Tomorrow, he would begin implementing the employee council system company-wide. Next month, Maria's industry certification program would get its full corporate backing. But tonight, he would go home knowing that 15 people were sleeping better because someone had finally listened when they needed help most. 6 months after that life-changing night shift, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at the National Retail Federation's annual conference. The subject of his keynote address: Leadership from the Ground Up. What happens when CEOs stop hiding in boardrooms? But first, he had a story to tell. "Last year I thought I was running a successful company," Marcus began, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "Our profits were up, our efficiency ratings were stellar, and our management reviews were glowing. By every metric that mattered to Wall Street, Thomson Enterprises was crushing it." He clicked to the next slide, a photo of Maria in her custodial uniform taken from the store's security footage on that first night. "But I wasn't leading a successful company. I was presiding over a system that allowed good people to suffer while predators profited from their pain. And the worst part? I had no idea it was happening." The auditorium remained completely silent as Marcus walked the audience through his undercover experience. The wage theft, the benefit fraud, the systematic psychological abuse that had been happening under his own company's name. The truth is, real leadership isn't about commanding from above. It's about understanding from below. It's about recognizing that the people closest to the problem are usually closest to the solution. He clicked again. The new slide showed Maria at her desk, wearing her store manager blazer, reviewing quarterly reports with her team. Today, Maria Santos manages one of our highest-performing locations. Employee satisfaction is at an industry-leading 94%. Customer ratings have increased 47%. And profits? They're up 23%, because when you treat people right, everything else follows. Marcus gestured to the audience, where Maria sat in the front row, representing Thomson Enterprise at her first national conference. But this story isn't really about Thomson Enterprises. It's about every company, every leader, every person who has the power to make someone else's day better or worse. The presentation continued with concrete results. The worker-verified fair employment certification that 12 major retailers had already adopted, the industry-wide wage theft investigations that had recovered $2.3 million for workers, the federal legislation strengthening labor protections that had been inspired by their public disclosure. "We've proven that doing right by employees isn't just morally correct, it's profitable. Companies with worker-verified certification are seeing average profit increases of 18% and customer loyalty improvements of 31%. As Marcus concluded his presentation, he returned to the personal story that had started it all. 6 months ago, I heard someone crying in a bathroom and decided to investigate. That moment of basic human curiosity changed everything. Not just for Maria, not just for Thomson Enterprise, but for thousands of workers across the industry." He paused, looking directly into the cameras that were broadcasting this keynote live. "So here's my challenge to every leader watching this. When was the last time you really listened to the people who work for you? Not in a scripted meeting or a sanitized survey, but really listened? When did you last see your workplace through the eyes of someone who can't afford to lose their job?" Marcus stepped closer to the edge of the stage. Real leadership means lifting others up, especially when nobody's watching. It means using your power to protect people, not profit from their vulnerability. And it means having the courage to admit when your systems are broken and the determination to fix them. The final slide appeared. A photo of the Thomson Enterprise Employee Council meeting with representatives from all 47 stores gathered around a table as equals. The person crying in that bathroom could be in your company right now. The question is, will you hear them? And more importantly, will you act? As applause thundered through the auditorium, Marcus felt the same satisfaction he'd experienced that night when Brad Miller was escorted from the store. But deeper than satisfaction was something else. Purpose. After the presentation, as Marcus signed copies of the case study that Harvard Business School had written about the Thompson transformation, a young executive approached him. "Mr. Thompson, I think we might have some issues at our company that are similar to what you found."
Where do I start?
Marcus handed him Maria's business card. "Start by listening, really listening. And when you hear something you don't like, don't rationalize it away. Fix it." Later that evening, Marcus called the store to check in with Maria, a ritual that had become part of his weekly routine. "How's Sophia doing?" he asked. "Perfect. Her cardiologist says her heart is stronger than most kids her age. She's been asking when she can visit the store again. She wants to see Mama's office. Bring her by any time. I'd love to meet the little girl who helped save our company." "Marcus?" Maria's voice grew serious. "I got a call today from a custodial worker at Henderson Retail. She'd seen the news coverage and wanted to know if our employee council model could work at other companies." "What did you tell her?" "I told her to document everything, find allies among her co-workers, and that we'd help her build a case if she needed it. Was that okay?" Marcus smiled. "That was perfect. You're thinking like a real leader now." After hanging up, Marcus stood at his office window, looking out at the Detroit skyline. Somewhere out there, in retail stores and restaurants and warehouses, there were probably other Mariahs, good people trapped in bad situations, waiting for someone with power to notice their pain. But now, there were also other Marcus Thompsons, leaders who'd heard this story and decided to look more closely at their own companies, their own responsibilities. Change was spreading, one workplace at a time. And it had all started with someone brave enough to knock on a bathroom door and ask a simple question: "Are you okay?" The truth had been worse than anyone imagined, but the solution had been simpler than anyone expected. Treat people like human beings, and everything else falls into place. If you've ever witnessed injustice in your workplace, or if you're in a position to make change happen, share this story. Because the person crying in the bathroom might be closer than you think, and they're counting on someone like you to care enough to act.